morning. My name is Jeff Neufeld, and I'm a class of 1968 Distinguished Military Instructor of Leadership here at the Academy, and I'll be your moderator for this panel. I'd like to welcome you to our second panel of the conference, which is entitled Navigating, Leading Through Vision. And yesterday and this morning, you heard about the challenge of creating the vision and how do you set the vision as a leader. In this panel, we're going to go a little deeper into that, and we're going to talk specifically as a leader, how do you make that vision happen? What is it that you do to make a vision happen, to implement a vision as a leader? Before I begin, though, I'd like to introduce our panel and take a moment to welcome them, a group of people that I think you will find have a tremendous amount of experience, both military and civilian, in making their own vision happen, as well as implementing some pretty big visions in their careers as well. I'd like to start on my far right with Ambassador Paula Dobriansky. She's had many senior positions in government over the last 22 years serving our nation, including being the longest-serving Undersecretary of State for Democracy and Global Affairs. And among her many, many honors, she has received the Secretary of State's highest honor, the Distinguished Service Medal. Currently, she holds the class of 1960 Distinguished Visiting Professor in National Security here at the Academy. So welcome, Paula. Head coach Anson Dorrance. What a story here. This gentleman is in his 33rd season as the Tar Heels women's soccer head coach. And his teams have a record of, if you can believe this, 728 wins to 44 losses. That would be a percentage of almost 93%. And currently, he is still the coach there. Along the way, he was the coach of the U.S. women's national team that won the initial World Championship in 1991 in the gold medal. And he was also inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame. So some pretty big visions there as well. To my immediate left is Brigadier General Tom Draude, United States Marine Corps retired. Brings a great wealth of experience, both military and civilian. He was a Marine combat leader on the ground in Vietnam, serving 3 times, served over 30 years in the Marine Corps. He was the Assistant Division Commander of the 1st Marine Division during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. General began his civilian career in 1993 with USAA, where he had many successive positions with that company, rising to Senior Vice President. And currently, he's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Marine Corps University Foundation at Quantico, Virginia. So welcome, General. And finally, Rear Admiral Robert Smith III, United States Navy, retired, also brings a tremendous wealth of experience across many disciplines. He retired from the Navy in 1996 as Chief of Staff to the Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet, following almost 35 years of continuous active and reserve service. In his civilian capacity, he has had numerous leadership roles at the Federal Reserve Bank, where he ended up as the Senior Vice President of the Dallas Fed. And currently, he's the President and CEO of Texas A&M University in Galveston. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. All right, just to set a little context for this morning. Arguably, one of the most difficult challenges for a leader is implementing a vision. And what the panel and I wanted to share with you is to set the context that this vision thing is not something you want to think about for generals and admirals and head coaches and ambassadors and CEO and presidents. Implementing a vision is something that all leaders do. From the very first in your career, many of you may be trying to implement visions right now in your roles within your universities or organizations. As leaders, we have our own visions that we're trying to implement, and we have our organization's visions. It's a very difficult thing to do. So hopefully in this panel, we'll explore and give you some practical discussion and nuggets that you can use walking out of here today to help you as a leader to implement your vision. I'd like to open our panel by asking each of our panelists to just share top level a couple of their key thoughts about some success factors that they have seen or used themselves in implementing visions over the course of their career as a leader. And I'd like to start with the Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. I'm very pleased to be here this morning. I have a chance to share some thoughts. Let me dive in on some of the success factors. In really making a vision happen, I think there are a number of elements that can really achieve what you want to get achieved. First is your vision should really be clearly stated, clearly articulated. If you're not able to state it clearly, how could the people you want to mobilize behind the vision or the end result you want to achieve, how can you get there? So the first is state it very clearly and also effectively. Second element that I would pick out would be teamwork. Teamwork, I have no doubt, is important in sports. Well, in the policy arena, teamwork really matters because even though the leader sets the tone, clearly states a particular vision, a goal, objective, but it's essential to have a team that's going to mobilize around that goal, objective, and try to achieve it. How do you do that? You got to make sure that you delegate. The leader is not just the only person who's calling the shots. You delegate responsibility. You have an esprit de corps. You have stakeholders that get immersed in the goal and the objective and trying to obtain it. When you do that, you have a third component. The third component, at least I believe, that can really contribute to success is having a good multiplier effect. In other words, one thing leads to the next in obtaining your goal and objective. That doesn't mean there aren't deviations and challenges that come along the way, but you want to look at how do you want to have a multiplier effect and get everybody wrapped around a particular goal strategy. Finally, I would just say that I think that one of the best ways of also implementing a vision and getting to where you want to be is having a constant course, a good strategy that you lay out up front. Your team is around it, but you know what's also important is not only being constant, but being flexible. You know that you're going to have a lot of twists and turns. If you don't have some flexibility planned within, in other words, not just your plan A, but your plan B and your plan C, you may not be able to achieve the vision. And just a quick footnote to conclude on, one example that just comes to my mind, I worked with President Bush on the issue of combating avian influenza. This was an uphill climb because, by the way, at the time we were doing this, actually only about 30 countries actually had preparedness plans. So first, we chose to have him speak at the United Nations. Great platform. Everyone gets to hear it. It's international. So that matters greatly. And second, we set up a coalition. Multiplier effect. It's not just our team, but it's other countries that also had a stake in it as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Coach?
Yeah, this is interesting. Obviously, my background isn't in leadership studies, but I can certainly share some of my stories. I remember when the first women's collegiate championship was looming on the horizon, we had decided we were going to go after it. So what happened in the spring before the championship season the following fall, they had a faculty athletic department luncheon. And I was asked to be the speaker, and I stood up in this luncheon. I basically predicted the first women's collegiate championship was going to be won by the University of North Carolina. And I remember when I was exiting this luncheon, Bill Lamb, an experienced wrestling coach that we had on the staff in athletics, came up to me and said, "Anson, that was absolutely insane." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You can't predict you're going to win a national championship. The odds are so much against it. It's just crazy what you've done. Now you've set a standard that's absolutely ridiculous. And if you do anything but win it, you have to consider that a season of failure." And I basically told him that's exactly how I was going to consider the season. I was going to consider it a failure unless we won the national championship. The thing I loved about that kind of statement is it makes a statement of who you are. And I got the girls together that we had on the team, the girls that we had recruited, and that was our goal right out of the gate. We were going to win everything. And we were going to win by the widest possible margin, and we were going to basically set a standard for the game that was completely different. We're going to do things completely counter to the common methodology in our game. In fact, we even used a military model. We believed in dueling. We believed in winning duels. We believed in dominating territory. In fact, we had this phrase called territorial imperative, which is a phrase we took from the animal kingdom, where basically animals mark their territory and then basically defend it. And so I told the girls they're going to mark out a territory in the field and basically defend it with their lives. And we went in with the mentality we're going to be the fittest, the most combative. We're going to train the psychological dimension. And in women's sport, this was new. In women's athletics, back during this period in the early 80s, it was all about sportsmanship and being friendly, and we were not going to be sportsmanlike or friendly. We were going to go after people and rip their throats out and just watch them bleed to death in the field, and we were going to just absolutely destroy everyone we could. And so this is sort of a new model for women's athletics. But in terms of empowering women and the direction women started to go in and basically where they are, I thought this was a great role model for our collegiate team. And that's still our philosophy. I am here because Karen Jennings-Gabert, the coach here at Navy, played for me on the first World Championship team. And for all of you midshipmen in the room that know this extraordinary woman, I don't think you really know who she was because the publicity back then wasn't that good. This was the greatest woman player of her generation. She was the MVP of the first Women's World Cup, and we were world champions against the run of the game because, of course, this game is an international game. And we did the same thing with our women's national team. We got them together before the first Women's World Championship, and I actually sat them down in a room and I said, okay, you know, ladies, how do you want to win this thing? Do you want to win this thing as a surprise team that comes out of nowhere and dominates the world, or you want to make a statement now that you're the best team in the world, go into the World Cup with a target in your back, and just destroy everyone anyway? And they decided that's the way they wanted to go in. And it was absolutely spectacular. And we told them that no one could put pressure on us. And it's interesting, the press tries to put pressure on any sort of venture. And I told them when they were talking to the press, they had no right to our story. This was our story. They had no right to expect anything from us. This was our expectation. And we're going to win it for ourselves and basically for our country and make a statement about women's soccer in America. And so our aggression from that platform was also very clear. And again, we trained them like warriors, trained them to duel, trained them to fight, trained them to be combative, and trained them to basically have no respect for the opponents except to respect the fact that they were going to have to fight through them to win. And it was a whole new paradigm shift in women's athletics. It was a paradigm shift in the world's game. And ever since, the world's been trying to keep up with us.
Thank you, Coach. And you can see why he's head coach for 33 years. Turn it over to General now, sir, for your comments.
Thank you. And first of all, congratulations to all who made this happen. Bravo Zulu to you. I'd like to reinforce the notion that vision is not for admirals and generals. It is really so often junior officers. And using Anson's example, let me tell you a story. True story about a Naval Academy graduate just 3 years after being commissioned. As a first lieutenant, he was assigned as a regimental assistant intelligence officer, a job he did not seek because he was an infantry officer. But rather than complain or curse his fate, he decided to bloom where he was planted and threw himself into the job. When he learned that a potential enemy was scheduled to make an amphibious landing against another country, he borrowed an admiral's tugboat to watch it, photographing and making sketches and absorbing details of the new landing craft. He compiled a 13-page report complete with photographs and engineering drawings and sketches, along with recommendations for improving the design. He sent it to the Navy office in Washington, convinced it would become the landing craft for the Marine Corps. Later, he wondered what happened to his report and went to that office where he was taken down into the bowels, to the filing cabinet, to the drawer, and there it was with a note on top of it saying, "A report from some nut in China." It took a while, and he met a builder from New Orleans for this vision to become reality. That reality, the Higgins boat, according to General Eisenhower, won the war for us. It carried more troops, Army and Marines, than any other vehicle in World War II. And it all began with the first lieutenant, later Lieutenant General Brute Krulak, who had a vision and had the perseverance to carry it through. And that continued on, that vision of using helicopters in combat. The first one to do in Korea, as well as counterinsurgency in Vietnam. So the point here is that this is not for admirals and generals, it's for youngsters like you. And to have the encouragement and the nurturing to make things happen and to persevere.
Thank you, General. Admiral?
Thank you. Let me just add, I'm honored and privileged to be here today, and congratulations to the team who put this conference together. And being an Aggie and Texas A&M, we have a tradition. It's howdy. And there are 4 Aggies here from the Corps of Cadets, and they at least answered up howdy. And we've had some good competitions with you, Coach, too, on the soccer field. So that's good. The vision thing, I think is probably the most difficult attribute of a leader to get your hands around. And you think about it, and first of all, you've got to decide what you want to be. And that takes work before you launch a vision of whatever it is, even within your own scope of responsibility. But I think it's hard, and vision really is our beliefs, and you really can't quantify it. Everybody wants to quantify most everything, and I have a pet project of being a contrarian to the quants, but you have to have the bean counters. I realize that, but the vision thing does not really fit into that in my view. Surveys continue to tell us that the most important element of job satisfaction is you want to make a difference, and vision thing plays an important role in that want to make a difference. And in deciding what you want to be, you have to kind of think outside the box. Obviously, many times, if you think of a high jumper with the name of Fosbury, everybody high jumped one way for many years. And then this crazy guy with long hair and the Fosbury flop came along. And as you know now, no one jumps the old way anymore because you could jump higher the other way. So sometimes you have to take that vision and really think about it, and obviously he did. You bring that up to the current day, and George Mitchell is a prominent geologist. He was in World War II. He hit the beaches of Normandy. But he has changed our energy business in this country. We drilled through the shale formations for many years, and George kept telling them we can get and extract oil and gas from shale formation. No one believed him, but he finally persisted and persisted and persisted. He's 92 years old today and just recognized as one of the world's 100 most important thinkers. So he had a vision. He built a city north of Houston known as the Woodlands, which is a role model for planned cities. And so these vision things, you have to have the tenacity and persistence to stay on message and stay with the hunt, so to speak. But I'll stop there. Go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So you heard from our panelists some very common themes about implementing a vision. What are those specific traits or things that a leader does to make it work at any level? And you heard some things such as communication and empowering the team, building a coalition, staying on your message but being flexible. How do you get the message across to your organization? What do you do about adversity and opposition to your vision? You have a great idea, you're trying to implement it, and that can come from different angles. In a couple of minutes, we'll open it up for questions, so I'd like you to start thinking about, as leaders, your questions around how do you make the vision happen. But on a couple of those key points, I want to come back to our panel first and just ask them to maybe share some of their experiences around either what does it take to be successful in the communication, empowering your team, building the coalition. What do you do when opposition rears up or skepticism rears up against your vision? How do you address that? So I'll ask our panelists to take one dimension there each and comment on it, and then we'll go to you for questions. Ambassador, if I may.
Right. Well, let me do communication. And I thought on this one I'd give you 3 examples. First, I worked at the State Department for 8 years, and the first 4 years I was working under General Powell, Secretary of State Colin Powell. One of the things that he did was on communicating a particular policy or goal, objective, vision that we had, he would bring us together in his office, and bluntly speaking, we would debate the issue. We literally go into the pros and the cons of the issue. But what I would tell you is, after we got through that debate, and he made a decision that, okay, this is our objective, this is the vision that we're going after, this is what we're going to be wrapped around, Everybody who went through that door embraced it, even if you may have lost in the debate that went on in his office and presenting the pros and the cons. So here, one of the things that I think to be imparting to all of you that's important is the importance of not only having a debate and a discussion over what your communication strategy, how you're going to articulate your position and your vision, but once you've decided it as a team, you go out the door. He saw that there has to be a standard. One standard, we're all part of singing that same sheet of music. You don't have dissensions from within. And how important that was, I could tell you in terms of policy. Second thought that I want to impart to you is that we thought about in government and the State Department all the time was how could you use recognizable figures like celebrities to get out there to articulate a particular policy or vision. And in this case, we used many of them, some of them who came to us, and there was a good match. For example, I'm going to name a number of stars. Bo Derek was very involved with environmental issues and wildlife trafficking issues. We had Richard Gere. He was a very strong and ardent proponent of rights for Tibet, as well as for articulating the importance of providing support on HIV/AIDS. We also had Angelina Jolie. She was the Goodwill ambassador on refugees and very outspoken on that. And then also we had Ricky Martin. He came in to our offices and talked about trafficking in persons. So, step back, what do you take from this? Let's take Ricky Martin. If we're going to dispatch someone who's going to really communicate most effectively a strategy in Latin America, who would be more popular and more engaging and more effective? I don't think I would be the person to do this. It would be Ricky Martin. Speaks the language, he's very well known, very popular. So we would look at bringing celebrities in. Last one that I mentioned to you is that we looked at, and sometimes it could fit, sometimes it may not, is do you want to have some form of recognition? In other words, when you're inching towards your goal and vision and you're almost there and it's almost in reach, you might want to give some incentive to those stakeholders who are also supporting your effort. In other words, do you want to have some kind of certificate or some acknowledgement or an award? An example where I felt that this came into play from the governmental side was when we would deal with a number of corporations. There were many corporations that provided incentives and were doing what is known as corporate social responsibility. And by recognizing them, we were communicating our own vision effectively by also giving this award to a particular company or corporation. So those are three strategies, just then the straight and narrow of making sure that you're very clear in what you're articulating.
Thank you, Ambassador. Coach?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to address something that Admiral Smith very graciously glossed over. He was talking about the rivalry between North Carolina and Texas A&M. What he failed to mention is that this year they did beat us, and I'm still pissed about it. So just so he can appreciate it's certainly not lost on me.
That would be 92.9%.
So yeah, I want to deal with adversity, and actually the aspect of adversity I want to deal with is something that has evolved and changed in my coaching persona from when I started. I think when most of us begin in leadership positions, we all have an interesting kind of idealism, and I think in coaching, my idea was I would have this unit of players and I would try to transform all of them into the best players they could be, but also certainly in a collegiate environment, a part of our obligation is human development. So I wanted to also make these young women as extraordinary as they could be by the time they graduated. I think as a young coach, you've got this incredible idealism that you can change people for the good, and you can transform them through your culture. And I guess what I'd like to share with everyone in the room is I don't believe that anymore. What I believe now is that there are some people you just have to cut out of the herd. You've just got to get rid of them. And if you had asked me this question 20 years ago, I would have said, no, you keep working with them, you nurture them, and you have this incredible optimism, and now I don't believe that anymore. Part of this was shaped by Jack Welch. He and I served Franklin Covey for a year on a speaking circuit. And it was interesting listening to him address the way he transformed the GE culture. And any of the business people in the room can certainly appreciate what he did to one of America's most extraordinary companies. And what he basically told us, because this gentleman asked him from the group that was listening to the presentations about his policy of basically cutting the bottom 10% annually. And he was sort of attacked again by this young idealist. Well, don't you want to try to, institute policies where you're re-educating this group and, giving them a second chance and seeing if they can change? And he basically said no. He said in his experience, the resources that he would commit to transform this lower part of his culture could be better served by spending the same amount of resources in the top 10%. And at the time, I was sort of wavering between this idealist that I was as a youth and more of a realist that I am now, and he convinced me to go the other way. And I am now absolutely convinced he's correct. And so here's what's interesting. I was having this discussion with our admissions director. The huge challenge that he has and I have is who do you bring into your culture? Who do you bring into your program? And I have to concede something. We bring in 5 scholarship kids a year on average. One of those kids is better than we expected. Basically 2 are about what we expected. 1 is worse than we expected, and 1 is so bad we try to get them to transfer. So if you look at this, we only have a 60% hit rate. And now I am, as soon as I sort out this person's not going to make it, I do everything I can to eliminate this person from our culture. The energy I spend on this individual is to get rid of them, and get rid of them as fast as possible. In fact, if I had the foresight in the preseason, I would cut them immediately. And I just want to share that with all of you, because obviously most of the people in this room are young and idealistic, but eventually you'll come to the same conclusion. Invest your resources with the people that are going to help you the most.
Thank you, Coach. And I would add a footnote to that in terms of a leader implementing a vision. I happened to be a young executive in GE at the time Jack Welch was implementing that. And his vision came down, and every year as a manager of people, I was required to draw up a 10% list of people I knew who wouldn't be in the company. So one thing to think about as a leader in the vision, when you're implementing someone else's vision, how do you deal with that as a leader? It's not always easy as just saluting and doing it. General?
I'd like to blend a bit of the communication with the adversity. Visionaries have got to be good communicators, and Captain Clark struck a fine note this morning saying leaders have to be readers. And your communications ability begins with that of not just the content, but how it is expressed by good writers. And you do that by reading, finding out what style appeals to you. Listening has become a lost art. We see listening as a passive endeavor instead of an active. Look at the person speaking, see the passion, see the gestures, what is the total message. But writing is an absolute requirement. It must be done in order for you to get your message out, and it must be done well. And along with the writing is the courage to write for professional journals, to put your name on something and to withstand the criticism that comes from it. The biggest regret, or one of the biggest regrets of my life, is that I did not write more. And then lastly, speak. You've got to be able to communicate your message, and leaders have to stand out in the spotlight from time to time. But the adversity is something that you will face. Let me read something written nearly 500 years ago that captures it well because it still applies today. There's nothing more difficult to plan, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than the creation of a new system. For the initiator has enmity of all who would profit by preservation of the old institution, and merely lukewarm defenders and those who would gain by the new ones. Machiavelli, and he was spot on. Therefore, vision will promote ridicule, as Machiavelli has stated. The ridicule that General Krulak had, the report prepared by some nut in China. But as he built the models of the craft that he envisioned, he had the saying of President Calvin Coolidge on the wall over his head, which read, "Doubters do not achieve. Skeptics do not contribute. Cynics do not create." So it's easy to be a doubter, a skeptic, or a cynic. It's tough to be a visionary. And how do you address this? You have to find allies, particularly a senior mentor who will normally find you because of your communications, your writings, your speakings, and thinks that you're an individual worth saving because other seniors will decide that you ought to be thrown to the wolves because you're a pain in the neck and other parts of the anatomy. So just keep that in mind. Communicate, develop your communication skills regardless. You must have them as a leader and be prepared to face adversity and opposition.
Thank you, sir. Admiral.
Thank you. I'll do communication slant adversity a little here too. When I first became a division officer, I guess in taking some of the leadership training from the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M and moving forward to my officer training in the Navy, I found that you really, two things that a sailor wants to know, and General Mattis related to that last night some. They want to know specifically what you want them to do, and then they want to know why you want them to do it. And if you can answer those two questions, you can have success in this vision thing. But you have to deal with it day in and day out and stay on message. The vision thing sets us apart from the rest. It certainly expresses our high standards and the quest for excellence and improvement. And I like to take an old passage, and I used it as a division officer. The least of us is the sum of all the rest. And so, you know, you think you're good, but you've got to pick up, and you got to pick up the least of those. Although I'll come back on the adversity thing because I agree with the coach to some extent here. I've learned over the years that's a good principle to stand by, but there's other considerations. The adversity thing, I'll take you back to some Texas history briefly. We Texans get kind of painted into the wrong corner sometimes, but you know, Texas was the only nation that voluntarily and voted to join the United States. So I'd like to make that plain that we were a republic at one time, a nation, and we volunteered. But Sam Houston was certainly a very much of a disciple of Andrew Jackson. But this was taking place before the Alamo, and this was a conversation between Sam Houston and overcoming adversity. Houston had a vision to take to win freedom from Mexico because of taxes, because of not being represented, and so forth and so on. And Sam Houston was talking to Jim Bowie. You may recall Jim Bowie died at the Alamo, and Sam Houston said, "Jim, you just have to remember that you have to get up every morning and start the fight all over again. It never stopped." He talked about the Athenians and the Romans, about being a war and a peace party. He said there's always been a war and a peace party. Now, this conversation was taking place in about 1833, 35. And he said, not only do you have people who do not want to fight for their country and for freedom, they want to prevent you from fighting for your country and freedom. But he says that argument is age-old, and it will continue forever. So I thought that, you know, in overcoming adversity, Sam Houston was talking about things that could be in the narrative in today's world. It's kind of in the coaching metaphor area, but I do think you have to get the right people on the bus and get them in the right seat. And I have a close friend who runs Cooper Industries that was with GE and disciple of Jack Welch. But sometimes you really cannot bend everyone into the vision thing, and you just really need to kind of see them drift on away or do something that's more inclined to what they want to do. And doing the right thing. General Mattis talked about that last night. I thought he was right on target with anything he says. I adopt immediately. He's a great leader of this country. So doing the right thing, ethics, values, etc. You can't. In trying to overcome this adversity issue is really important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you to all of our panelists. At this time, I'd like to invite our audience up to the microphones to ask their questions of the panelists regarding how do leaders make that vision thing a reality? Take on any of the topics we presented or your own factors as well. Communication, opposition, adversity, empowering your team, innovating, teamwork, coalition, people outside fighting you, people inside fighting you. And begin to take those questions. So I think you're first, sir.
Good morning. First Class Petrino, U.S. Naval Academy. Thank you to the panel for being here this morning to contribute to the conference. My question comes from Coach, your story about how you came and you made that claim, okay, we're going to win the championship, and if we don't, it's a failure. My question is, was that goal, was that bold statement, was that born from the potential you saw in your team, or just a goal that you wanted to achieve? And if it wasn't born from the potential in your team, and you maybe truly believe that the team didn't have that potential, how would you approach a team like that, and how would you build them to become a national championship winning team?
Okay, great question. First of all, I absolutely thought we were going to win. And the reason I did is I was the men's coach at North Carolina before I was given the women's team. So I had a background in recruiting on the men's side in the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is one of the elite soccer conferences in the country. And I was convinced that my recruiting pattern with the women was better than anyone else's. So I thought the kids we had coming in could help us win. So there's no question I thought we were going to win. But also, I've always believed in I guess putting some pressure on myself and our culture to be successful. So I think when you make a bold public statement, trust me, you spend the rest of the time just scurrying around trying to make sure that that's going to happen. And I have no issue with that kind of pressure. So you also phrased another question in there about, well, what if I didn't think my team had the potential to win it? Well, the nice thing about my game, for those of you that aren't familiar with soccer, believe it or not, you can win any soccer game. All of us that have played the sport have been involved in games where we've been outshot 40-1, and we've won on that one strike into the upper corner. So the coolest thing about our game is there's absolutely always hope. Your goalkeeper can have a blinder. I mean, there are 1,000 ways you can win. And so even now, our standard every year is to win the national championship. And in the years we don't, we do consider it a failure. So believe it or not, even though we have had teams that I felt weren't very good, some of those teams have done some amazing things. And a part of the reason is because of this inane standard we continue to hold for all of them.
Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Sir.
Good morning. Thank you. This is an outstanding panel. I have two questions, one directed at the ambassador and one directed at the coach. But gentlemen, please feel free to chime in on either subject. First of all, Ambassador, could you further elaborate on your idea of the multiplier effect? I'm very intrigued by it, and potential real-world examples and how to implement that. And Coach, can you go through on the cutting the bottom 10% in terms of what traits you look for that qualify people to be in the bottom 10%? And what traits qualify them to be in the upper 90%? What do you look for in those players? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good question. Multiplier effect, well, it comes in different shapes and forms, but let me give you a couple of examples. I mentioned you have President Bush giving the speech at the United Nations. Part of his appeal was to set up a network of countries that basically would band together to combat avian influenza. And the purpose of the network, the international network, was to take preventive action, to share data and information about actually the virus, looking at ways of taking steps internationally and also regionally to curtail the virus. Well, what he was doing by setting up a network, you are imparting a responsibility to each of these countries to have a stake in this goal and this vision. And my example of, which was very striking to me, when we started, there were only about 30 preparedness plans. That was worldwide. And then a year later, there were about 120, 130. That meant that countries were listening, they were stakeholders, there was a multiplier effect here. They actually stepped forward, they had these preparedness plans on avian influenza, and they were literally coming together to support it. It's a cross-border issue, and everybody would have a stake in it. So that's an example. That's on a grand scale, but multiplier effect is also just being a surrogate within the State Department. The Secretary of State can't do something, and he asked the undersecretary, say myself or one of my colleagues, to go do something to bring actual NGOs, non-governmental organizations or corporations together at a meeting behind a particular policy. There are many ways of having a multiplier effect and getting what we call stakeholders, your troops. Troops take all different types of shapes and forms, your troops behind the single vision.
I guess to chase your question, I'll tell you a story. I got a call from the coach at Chapel Hill East, I would say in March of this past year. And he said, Anson, we got a kid on our roster that's been admitted to UNC, and she would love to try out for your team. Please come by and look at her to see if you'd like to invite her to try out. So I took my family and we went to a Chapel Hill East game, and the kid that he wanted us to look at was Caitlin Ball, his center back, and I'm watching her and thinking to myself, nah, I just don't think she can benefit us. I mean, can't change directions, not particularly explosive. Skill was very average, didn't have particular size. Basically, at our level, I thought she sucked.
Tell us what you really think.
So anyway, I get this lengthy email in the middle of the summer from her club coach, and his name was Pete Saden. And Pete says, Anson, we got this kid in our roster. She's coming to UNC. I can't believe you haven't invited her out. Her name is Caitlin Ball. She's extraordinary. We just won the Super Y National Championship, and the reason we won was because of Caitlin Ball. And I'm thinking to myself, well, gosh, every coach that's ever trained this kid absolutely loves her. You know, maybe I should at least interview her before I dismiss her. So she lived in town. 2 days before preseason begins, I called up Caitlin. I said, Caitlin, all of your coaches think you're the bomb. So, you know, come over to my house. Let me interview you. And, you know, if you answer the questions properly, I'll invite you out to our preseason, which was 2 days later. So she comes into my living room, and you can imagine how nervous she was. And she's sitting there with her arms folded and, you know, making herself as small as possible on my couch. I said, Caitlin, I've just got one question for you. If you answer this properly, I'll invite you out to our preseason in 2 days. Caitlin, are you a psycho? And she said, no. I said, great, see you in 2 days. So basically, to answer your question, we don't want psychos on the team. And actually, I should have invited her parents over, because you just don't want psychos on the team. You don't want parents who are psychos being a part of your organization either. But here are the 3 critical qualities, and here's what's absolutely amazing. Within 3 weeks, Caitlin Ball was starting at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This is a kid that I thought just couldn't do it, but she had 3 interesting qualities that make a huge difference if you want to make yourself elite in everything. She had competitive fire, she had self-discipline, and she had self-belief. So here was a kid that didn't receive our fitness packet in May like the rest of the team, and our fitness tests are draconian. I mean, everyone dreads them, and this kid, with 2 days preparation in theory for our fitness test, passed every one of them. So she was self-disciplined without instruction. She kind of came into practice, and she competed like there was no tomorrow. And even though this kid, you know, couldn't run, couldn't change directions, had no skill, and basically had nothing, she thought she had everything. She had remarkable self-belief. And you know what? Those 3 qualities, self-discipline, competitive fire, and self-belief, can make you extraordinary, and she was. And she was one of the significant reasons why we had some effective matches this past year.
And from those skills, you can cultivate from those traits, you can cultivate the rest of the skills?
With those 3 things, you can do absolutely anything.
Thank you, sir.
Please.
Good morning, Madam Ambassador. I'm Cadet First Class James Evans, United States Air Force Academy. My question is specifically for you, but if anybody else wants to answer, by all means. It's a little bit different from the leadership side of it, but to what extent should you believe the United States should be promoting human rights abroad? What extent should we try to establish democracies abroad? And what's the balance between doing those good things and asking American servicemen to serve overseas for for another country's people? What's the balance there?
You know, it's interesting you asked that question, because I opted to just give my examples on communications, but on the topic of adversity and opposition, that was going to be one of my examples, because it's one of the policy areas. We set a goal. The goal is that democracy, we want to advance and promote democracy, and we want to advance human rights abroad. But we did run up against opposition, and I think part of the opposition was derived from, circumstances and situations that arose. Some which was targeting the United States for its own behavior, and saying, well, are you actually being duplicitous in the way in which you're pursuing this? That on one hand you have a goal and a vision, but on the other hand, how are you doing? So there's that issue. The second issue was that actually some also, we ran into a problem of communication. And the communication being that, and I'll tell you what the policy is, and my answer to the question formally is, yes, I am a strong proponent that we should be supporting democracy and human rights abroad, but it's how you do it, how you implement it. What do I mean? We don't just take our model and transplant it on the soil of another country. It's not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable. People will resent it, and they will resent us, and it will be a failure. You have to work from within. Grassroots involvement matters in another country, and also engaging particularly foreign non-governmental organizations to also be advocates, to be part of your team and effort. The last piece you said, what about servicemen, women? On that, there's such a strong debate about this. I firmly believe that the role of the military is, number one, it's protecting our nation and our national security. Secondly, there are situations, Afghanistan is the case in point I'd pick out, where you have non-secure areas where we want to have more sustainable democratic development. In order to do it, we do need the involvement of servicemen, women, and in this case, we have a coalition, not only of Americans, but other countries that have come together and have helped build up different parts of Afghanistan. But I would say that I think the role needs to be very clear of what the military is. There are cases and situations where the military can really assist in those areas where it requires it. But I don't see that as the primary role, meaning nation building of the military.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, next question, please.
Thank you all for coming out. My name is Mara Kish. I'm from Lafayette College. And I'm an athlete there, so this question will mainly be focused around athletics, though it does apply to the military as well. Now, I have a question about how to implement a vision that I have, or a team member has, that is stronger, bigger, and more powerful than what our team is aiming for. But I'm not a starter, I'm not a captain. How do I implement that with no authority? So I guess this would also pertain to if I'm enlisted in the presence of officers.
I think that's a great question, and I would say it's probably true of any leader anywhere, based on my background, military, civilian, sports, or otherwise. What do you do when you have a great idea or vision and you're not the designated leader or the most senior person in the room? Would anyone like to start on that one?
I'll give it a try. As I've indicated, because you're advocating change, there's a resistance to change that you're going to be facing. And one of the things that you would hope to acquire is through your vision and the communication of your vision, allies that are going to be with you and will be supportive of this, because not everyone is going to be with you. The other is that I used to use in at USAA in my current situation, and bringing about a change, and what I called the 4 Ps. And the first is to be able to create and provide a picture of what it is that you want to accomplish. What is it going to look like? In order to avoid confusion, what is that thing going to be? The second is the why. This morning we had a conversation about, or discussion about the necessity of the why. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, said, if you can explain the why, most people can live with the how. But so often when we bring about change or advocate change, we immediately get into the how without explaining the why. And the why reduces resistance to change and achieves buy-in. And I'll give an example of that in just a second. The third P is the plan. What's it going to look like? How do we avoid chaos by making this happen. And the last is the part. What role does the individual play in this, as well as the team? So to reduce the fear and anxiety, is there a place for me? Am I going to be left out? What is the part that we have? And the example I give you is in Desert Storm, as we were getting ready to go through 2 minefields into Kuwait, and one of the battalions was that of General Mattis, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. The division commander, General Myatt, and I would go down to the units that were going to have to carry this off and say, here's our plan. Now you tell us what's wrong with it. What assumptions have we made that are incorrect? Because if there's something wrong, you're going to suffer, and we want your feedback. And so here we had sergeants and lieutenants talking to generals the way it should happen, explaining to us what we had missed in our plan. So the necessity of actively soliciting feedback as you are thinking about putting together that plan is essential. And it's not just a matter of buy-in, it's a commitment that must be necessary in order to bring that change about.
Let me find out what sport you played.
I play field hockey.
Okay, well then there are some direct applications to our game. There are things you can do. There is a leadership progression. The first thing we believe in is, first of all, you have to lead yourself. So in order to lead your team in anything, you have to have credibility. So believe it or not, even as a reserve, you can become the leader in fitness. So what you've got to do, obviously, is to be the fittest person on the roster, although you are a reserve. So you can set a standard for yourself. If you set that standard for yourself, then you're empowered to lead the others around you. Our game, we talk about player development as time with the ball. It'd be the same thing in field hockey. If you want to become an elite soccer player, you have to invest in time with the ball. So another part of a way you could change your own culture is by every single day for an hour or so on your own, work with the ball in your stick. And then invite the elite players to join you. So there are ways that you can change the culture even in your role is by leading yourself, having a credibility to lead others, and then invite others with you. The final thing I would recommend for you is what's absolutely critical is talent. So volunteer to be the recruiting coordinator for every elite athlete that comes on campus. And when that elite athlete comes on campus, resolve as your mission to get that athlete to sign at your university, because then you're going to leave a legacy. And a part of the way you do that is to be very positive about everything that is entailed in your culture, at your university. Find out all the great things about the school and be an extraordinary positive life force, very similar to Viktor Frankl, by the way, and his Man's Search for Meaning themes. And you can change the culture even from your current position. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you can make a difference.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Next question, please.
Morning, Midshipman Third Class Poser, United States Naval Academy. We've been discussing visionary leadership and implementing that. For me, it's really easy to visualize that in the civilian sector, where you can be a hotshot entrepreneur, come onto the scene with a great new product, get the right people, and get the ball rolling. My question kind of regards organizations that are a lot more established, specifically the military and the government. And my question is, in the government, where there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape and specifically a constitution designed to hinder fast-acting visions, and also with two-party politics kind of trying to compromise and please constituents, how can you maintain that vision while still maintaining your legitimacy among your constituents and kind of get the ball rolling in an organization where it's almost designed to put a lot of roadblocks in the way to hinder that? And then also we discussed where in some cases you have that bottom 10% and they're not necessarily, you can invest the time to try to bring them into the organization, but that's not always necessarily a possibility. In organizations like the military, where you don't always have the luxury of just eliminating that bottom 10% altogether, how can you go about handling that situation and investing that time without taking away and detracting from the entire organization?
Okay, Pam, I think I heard two distinct themes there, both very good. The first one around the notion of large organizations or structured organizations like the government and the military, and I would say many large corporations. They're resistant to change. How do you move through that with a vision And then back to the question of talent, the team, the A players, how do you deal with the ones that are not?
I've spent my whole life in public service in 2 departments of government, and I can, you know, some success, some not success, but courage and decisiveness, you need to do that. Most people are risk adverse. Reputational risk is important. Accountability in government is hard sometimes to do. I mean, what you were talking about is not easy, and I always think of Cicero, and he wasn't concerned with the barbarians at the gate, as you may recall in reading your history or philosophy. He was concerned about the unintended, and I'll underline unintended consequences of treason inside the gate. Of course, they killed Cicero, but you know, you deal with those elements and those components as it relates to a large department of government and all the bureaucracy and the red tape, and so it makes the job more and more difficult. But the vision thing will work. I mean, the vision piece, gathering people together to buy into your vision and what you want. I think the coach expressed it in an answer to an earlier question, but and the general did also, and certainly General Mattis last evening. But you have to work on it every day, and as I say, I hark back to my ensign and Lieutenant JGJs back on the fantail of a Navy ship talking to the sailors, and you can have influence, and you can persuade people to the vision thing, and if it's a good idea, you can move it up the chain and get results.
Could I just jump on that really fast? I'd have sort of 3 quick responses to you. First, I was thinking of, again, General Powell. When he came in, he wanted to make some changes immediately. You pick your moments in government because you're right in saying you don't have, with such big institutions, usually the opportunity to really move something forward in a rapid way. But if you're offered an opportunity in a window, you seize it. So when he came in as Secretary of State, I remember very distinctly, he immediately cut a lot of positions. And the way in which he did it, he asked all of the units, you know, give your views, but then boom, the decision was made. It was made at the very front end of the administration and at a time where you can bring about that change. The second point I'd make is when the coach was talking about, one of your first opening remarks, it really struck me when he was mentioning get rid of those bad players immediately. If I see one, you know, get them rid. I was thinking to myself, well, it's very different in government. It's not exactly the same sort of field that you're playing in, because civil service requirements, laws, I mean, there are a lot of things. But the word that came to my mind was you can't get rid of, meaning getting necessarily out of your building, but you marginalize them. In other words, they're in a different field, and you got the team that you want to work on. That's how you bring about change. And last, communication does matter. You seize those moments where you might give a speech. And why does that matter? Your people inside might not always be advocating your position, but guess what? You may have a lot of advocates outside, corporations, non-governmental organizations that are going to be with you in bringing about that change and wanting to get that change fast. So you got to think about all of the different players in this.
Could I just address the leadership aspect, the bottom 10%? This is a situation that every unit will find itself in. But that's what leadership, to me, is about. Not that difficult to lead those good Marines, good sailors, et cetera. Anyways, self-motivating, good backgrounds and so forth. You will find more and more your youngsters, the men and women that you're privileged to serve and privileged to lead, will come from backgrounds that would bring tears to your eyes, where there is no role model, there is no authority figure. And the service, the Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force, is the last chance to make an imprint on these youngsters. They're the 10% that have been told that they're no good, they're worthless, they're distractors, they're disciplinary cases, and so forth. I believe that it's incumbent on the leader to not give up on them. You do that through your example by spending time with them. Oftentimes in combat, those Marines who are not the best in garrison turn out to be the best when chips are down, because you believe in them. I'm still in contact with Marines from my rifle company of 1965 who still call me with questions about raising children and finances and so forth, because that relationship that was established because I did not give up on them. So you simply can't, and it takes more time. It once said that 90% of your time is spent on 10% of your people. You will be burned, and there will be cases, chances that you'll take where it all turns to other things, not that you would desire, but you can't become a cynic. An officer, as Napoleon once said, is a dealer in hope, and that hope includes those that he or she is privileged to lead.
Thank you.
Thank you
A
very
great
much.
paradox you see on both sides here for leaders. The idea that you want to develop your people and grow them and not give up on them. You have a vision to implement, and at times you have to make tough calls. As you heard from the panel, never an easy answer there, and I guess we'll leave that for a lifelong homework assignment for you future leaders out there. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you to the panel for spending your time with us. I'm Midshipman First Class Sean Cruz. My question is, culture has come up time and time again in this panel, and in our leadership classes we learned ritual is one of the 4 aspects of culture. What is the role of ritual in getting people to buy into a vision, and if you could, please provide an example.
Would like to take that question regarding the rituals and symbols and things that go on in an organization as part of the vision?
I use, you know, to be just quite simple, a lot of metaphors and a lot of history, as you may recall from some of my remarks here this morning. And I think it's really, really important. Some people don't think it is important, but I think it works. And I think people can identify with that. You certainly see it every day in the real world. Perception is reality, and you've got to deal with it. And if you've got the right examples and the right metaphors, it works. And so I would encourage you to think about that and use that in your own way, in your own scope of influence, for the better good. Nothing's perfect, but don't leave the better good on the table.
Yeah, I stole something that has really, I think, been important to us. I was reading in the New York Times Magazine about this woman that had attended Columbia, and it was during a period when they had hired a Russian exile poet by the name of Joseph Brodsky. And Brodsky came into Columbia to teach Russian literature, and she was a PhD candidate in the program. And she said he came in, and with all the master's candidates and PhDs, he gave them reams of Russian literature and poetry to memorize. And of course, all the students got together and they rebelled against this, because what Brodsky didn't understand is in America you did this sort of memorization as elementary school children, and then you went on to more advanced things like thinking. So they basically got together and told him, you know, Joseph, we're just not going to memorize this stuff. And he said, well, if you don't memorize it, none of you will get your PhDs and your master's degrees. So they decided to do it. And she was writing this article because she said all of a sudden what started to happen is the stuff they were memorizing became a part of their intellectual fabric. It became a part of their discussions. It became a part of their debates. And it became a part of the way they thought about Russian literature. And I was thinking, well, this is a great way for us to try to implement our core values. Because I think all of us in this room could all agree on fundamental core values, you know, work hard and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And I think we're all filled with enough cliches to sort of make the correct choices in what we believe in. But getting a culture to implement this is the challenge. And so what we did with our fundamental core values is we attached a quotation to it. One of the most critical things for us in athletics is whining. There's nothing worse and more destructive than whining. So rather than have this core value, we don't whine, we have them memorize this quote to be a force of fortune instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Well, they memorize these things, and then if I hear someone whining, they have to recite, you know, George Bernard Shaw. And so what happens through the course of time when you memorize these things, it becomes a part of the fabric of who you are. So what has really worked for us is we have 12 core values. Every core value has a motivational quote attached to it, And what was cool about listening to the general talk about Viktor Frankl, we have more quotes from Frankl in our 12 core values than any other person out there, and we absolutely love it. And I think this can be transformational the same way it was for these PhD and master's candidates in Russian literature at Columbia.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Morning, Midshipman Second Class Legler. I have a question. It's more focused towards Coach Dorrance. The environment and the climate of your team is extremely competitive and cutthroat. And the question I have is, how do you foster a team environment or a family environment when these girls are competing day in and day out, not just for a starting position, but just for a position on the team itself?
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy because there are a lot of differences between leading men and women, but one of the interesting departures in leading women is the combative issues in a practice session can sometimes be taken outside the field. And just to share a story, I coached men alone for 3 years, and then for 10 years I coached men and women, and then since '89 I've just done the women. And we have this one drill in preseason that we do every preseason where in a 5v5 matchup, we have 2 5v5 games going, and you can only mark your own man. So basically, if one of the players in this match gets free and goes to goal, no one can assist you. And the reason we do this, it's an exercise in personal accountability. In other words, if you're going to be a part of our unit, you're going to be responsible. And you're responsible in this particular 10-minute battle is to take out your opponent. And of course, these are extraordinarily violent matches because everyone knows in preseason that the victors in these matches are the ones that end up in the field. Because invariably, I'll put the 2 left midfielders against each other, and they know what this means. They know the one that survives this duel will start. And so the dream of this girl her entire life to come in and start at the University of North Carolina is now a question of how she does in this duel. So it is the most violent, combative environment. Well, here's what's interesting with the boys and the girls. The boys at the end of this exercise go limping towards the water, and they're comparing the wounds they inflicted on each other. So one guy says, remember that time your cleat came up and you took my kneecap off? Look what you've done to my knee. And they're sharing mutually with the guy that just took his kneecap off the wounds. And there's this camaraderie of these 2 warriors walking towards the water coolers together that's sort of indicative of what's classic in male culture, to respect someone that just beats you to death. Well, what's interesting about the female culture is there are 2 separate camps at the water fountain, because now the girls that played against each other will have nothing to do with each other, and then they'll now get involved in these separate camps, which is dividing the team, as you've basically implied. So the huge challenge for us in women's athletics is to get them to accept the fact it's okay to take your best friend's head off in practice and still connect with her following it. So what's vital is balance outside the combative environment, the training environment. And then we do it basically socially. We eat meals together at opportunities, socialize at every opportunity, celebrate birthdays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to have a way of healing this divide that has just occurred in the training environment, and it's a very real one, especially in women's athletics. That was an excellent question.
Thank you, Coach. And I'm impressed with these combat metaphors. Are you sure you were never a Marine?
Well, I mean, I got to share the story. I was sharing this with the ambassador here. My dream as a kid was to go to West Point my entire life. I was raised overseas. I had read every...
You're going to let that pass, gentlemen?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I just have to tell you the truth. And then it was during the Vietnam War. My mother talked me out of going. She was absolutely convinced I was such a psycho I'd be fragged by my own troops. So... So I never ended up going, but my whole life I've loved military history and everything about it, and that's why when I was invited to come here, trust me, I jumped at it. So yeah, a lot of my, absolutely, I'm totally in favor of what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Good morning, Lieutenant Commander Rob Boyle, Royal Navy. In this world, it's a general question for the panel. In this world of multinational alliances, most of the people in this room, both military and civilian, work very closely with other nationalities throughout their career. What advice from the panel's experience can you offer these young people with dealing with other people's visions from different cultures and different backgrounds?
Would you like to start with that?
I'll give it a shot. My last tour in Vietnam was an advisor to the Vietnamese Marines. And in preparation for that, learned the language, a bit of the customs and tradition, but I had the combat background beforehand, so the combat credentials were there, so to speak. I can't tell you how important it is to learn at least the rudiments of another language. Back in the old days when I was at the Naval Academy, all of us had to study 2 years of foreign language. It was one of the best things that could have happened because it disciplined the mind that you could learn another language and be successful in it. So I think there's that aspect. There's no substitute for being able to speak even imperfectly another language, and I'm sure the ambassador has lots of sea stories in that regard. The other is to care about the people. Being an advisor, the two things that were really necessary were not really so much the language, was patience and to like the people. There were fellow advisors who had neither. Great Marines, lousy advisors. You've got to be patient in dealing, especially in our days in Iraq and now in Afghanistan, the patience that what's being done is going to be done imperfectly, but you can't do that for the other folks. It's got to be done by them. And you've got to like the people. You're with them, you live with them. That's got to be, I think, one of the sine qua nons of success in dealing with other cultures.
You know, I'd just add, because both of the General's points I certainly agree with, and something the General said earlier that I actually wrote down, because we often forget, and he's so right, and that is listening. And when you're dealing with other cultures, it really matters that you take the time, the effort, you actually hear their view, their visions, and you factor that in. It's not like, okay, this is our way, this is how it's got to be. There has to be a collaborative effort. And that is one of the most potent things that you could do, is actually listen first and then engage.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think it's particularly unique to the Naval Service and what we do. When Porter was sent into Japan in the 1800s to open up Japan, the Naval Service and naval officers, both the Navy and Marine Corps, have because we're on ships and we basically go around to different countries and do the kinds of things that the outreach. The Navy, in going forward, I don't think gets the credibility and the recognition it should get, or particularly our sailors, our deck plate sailors, going into places all around the world, 7x24, doing a lot of good deeds. And I really think it's important to our diplomatic relations and those kinds of things. But it's unique to the Naval Service.
Next question, please.
Hello, I'm Midshipman, third class Moden, and after the Texas A&M greeting, I just want to give Coach Dorrance a warm and welcome. Tar. Nice. All right, on a more serious note, the entire conference, the focus has been visionary leadership, but by simply reversing those words, you get the term a leader of visionaries. And I wanted to know, oftentimes the visions are held by followers, and what things can we do as leaders to like proctor our followers to be visionaries so that they can flourish and become future leaders?
This is really a great question, because oftentimes the service, my service, the Marine Corps, becomes so wound up in tradition that we've always done things right, and there's very little that we can change to improve degree of hyperbole here. But we have a tendency to eat our young. And the youngsters are those individuals who come up with the vision, the Pete Ellises, who years before the war with Japan predicted that was going to take place. So what do we do as seniors? We have to provide a degree of nurturing and protection for them, because lots of our peers will want to eat them alive. I at one time thought that Marine promotion boards ought to have as a requirement that the board be told, for example, to major, you are to select 10% of individuals who have been designated as questioners, pains in the neck and other parts of the anatomy, individuals who are always asking, isn't there a better way of doing things? And maybe 5% for lieutenant colonel. But the point is, we can't drive out these fresh new ideas, and the people who often are guilty of that are the old guys. It wasn't my idea. Therefore, it must not have much value, because if it had value, I would have come up with it. So as a senior, you've got to be very careful and to recognize these individuals and, again, provide that mentoring, nurturing, protection of them.
Yeah, I just jump in. Mentoring really matters. I couldn't agree more, certainly in the policy track. And also, secondly, what word really came to my mind is give responsibility, delegate, and take a chance. I could tell you in terms of my own career, I was very lucky. Actually, I was getting my graduate degrees at Harvard, and I had an internship at the National Security Council. I was only in my 20s. But I remember I was given responsibility. It inspired me. It motivated me. And by the way, there were challenges you were describing, General, of others. You know, they're looking at, well, what's her experience? What's, you know, but we always do it this way. And one last example, I used to head the Council on Foreign Relations office, and they put out these monographs. Well, traditionally, always the executive director is usually someone who's very experienced, has years of foreign policy background. When I was heading the office, I had suggested that we should get one of the term members. Term member means you have to be 35 and under. And actually we did it. And guess what? The person not only stepped up to the plate, but in my opinion did a great job. So, you know, there has to be flexibility, and you have to look at how to nurture, how to mentor, how to give opportunities.
Okay,
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Mitchell, third class Towson, University of Memphis. In discussing visionary leadership, usually a situation that we think are us as superior officers right at the top of the tier. My question pertains more to situations we might be confronted by as junior officers, because we're kind of in the center of that tier of authority. When communicating with a superior that others or people below you don't particularly like or respect, how do you motivate others to work towards a superior's vision without becoming kind of the undesignated leader and undermining their authority?
Okay, great question. If I understood, you're in the middle helping to implement a vision from up above, and how do you do that if it's a difficult message to convey?
Yes, sir.
And maintain respect of your team and everything?
Yes, sir.
We've probably all been there, having flashbacks.
Well, I think if you're in the middle of this thing, and I recall some of my own experiences, you've got to kind of take the vision from on top, and as the ambassador was saying, you've got to be unified when you leave the room. But I think you have to put it in your own words, and you have to come across in a sincere way to those that are being difficult to get on board. So it may be a little bit of a trial and error, but you have to you have to think through this. I like the words of Peter when he said, you know, be serious and be disciplined. And I think they're watching you, and you're a role model. And if you bifurcate from the top line, so to speak, you will be faulted for that. So it's not an easy question to answer, and it's something you should think about, work on, and grind away on it. But don't give up. I mean, you can't give up. You just got to move forward. And I think you can accomplish it if you think hard enough about it.
I think it was Nelson who said he feared more than the enemy the grumblings of junior officers. And I think there's something to that, because without the support and loyalty of junior officers, there can be some real difficulties. If the vision is clearly stated and explained and so forth, then that officer will have a little bit easier job. As a quick aside, when I was a company officer here and was asked questions about the loyalty, I'd ask or tell the midshipmen to read the Caine Mutiny, because it's a classic example of loyalty that is required. But also understand that you as the officer are they, you know, to your enlisted sailors and Marines. The they and their vocabulary is you as that ensign or second lieutenant. And therefore, a great deal rises and falls based upon the way that you convey and support your commanding officer, oftentimes in the unpopular decisions that have to be made, but simply must be made and must be carried out with all the commitment and energy as if it was your own idea. And that requires again, leadership and the example that you set as a leader to be respected, and they will.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more here and one more here. Sir?
Good morning. My name is Anh. I'm an international student from Vietnam that I'm studying at Nebraska right now. And I have like 2 questions for Coach Dorrance. I've been playing soccer for as long as I can remember, so I have a lot of respect for the work you have done and the achievement you have, the success you have achieved. And my question is, how can you create the spirit for your player? How can you create a culture for the team? And also the vision you implement that your team, your player will go out there and win almost every single game like that. Because when you win that many games, complacency will become a big issue, and your team will be a target for the other team that they want to take you down by any means possible. And my second question is, soccer is an 11-player team, and you know that, but in some team, there's always some player that better than the other. So some may have like the attitude like I'm better than the other, so I want to be treated differently because like without me, you cannot win almost every single game like that. So I want how you will deal with those people, have that kind of attitude. So that's my 2 questions.
Well, thank you. To answer the first part of your question, we do things absolutely a different way. We, from the beginning, even going back to the 91 World Cup, we've played 90 minutes of high pressure. And we've been unique in this, although if you're starting to watch the game at the highest level now and you're watching the EPL, they're all playing high pressure now for 90. We were doing this back in the late 80s in preparation for the first World Cup because obviously not being a soccer nation, we had to figure out our way to win. So we were going to win by being fitter than everyone else. We were also going to be, we were going to win by playing a different system. Back in the day, everyone played a 4-4-2. We played a 3-4-3. It's a high-risk system. We're pushing players forward. We're playing with maximum pressure. So everything we did was completely against the soccer traditions. And so every time a team played mine, they would have to make adjustments. When we played every other team, we had no adjustments to make. So we made ourselves difficult to play again. To get to your second question, I believe in the star system. So what you've described for me is up the alley of any team I've trained. For example, Karen Jennings, who is the MVP of the 91 World Cup, her quality was this ability to beat defenses on her own. So the way we structured our offense, we actually had 3 players with that capability. In fact, in China, where we won the first Women's World Cup, they called our front line the triple-edged sword. And I thought it was a great description of Karen Jennings, Michelle Akers, and April Heinrichs. Karen's ability is she could just beat any defense on her own. Michelle's ability was to shoot from distance. April didn't beat them off the dribble. She just ran over them. She was a freight train. And so we had this star system in place, and I've always believed in that. So our whole structure of our team was to get the ball to one of these 3 superstars and get out of their way. And so we constructed our attack that way. We genuflected to the talent we had, and we basically won with these 3 absolutely extraordinary athletes. And so we used exactly what you've described as a conduit for our success.
Thank you.
Last question, please.
Thank you. Midshipman First Class Schomburg from Boston University. My question is, when you're in a position of authority as an officer, how do you recognize the difference between what is a good idea and a sailor with a vision versus a subordinate who is really just a crazy guy from China or a pain in the neck?
Gentlemen?
I'm reminded that with my children, they would come to me and say, I've got a great idea. And my response was, no, you have an idea. I'll determine whether it's great or not. so it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. I think this is a case where it takes judgment and maturity, which you will acquire over a period of time. Look at the nature of the individual. Is this someone who perhaps is thoughtful and has given some thought to this idea, this new way of doing things, or is it truly an off-the-wall thing? But even the off-the-wall aspect I wouldn't dismiss out of hand. Worth considering. Consider that, first of all, it's a compliment that that sailor or Marine has come to you and said, I've got an idea that I think will make things better. What a compliment that they have confidence in you as an officer, that you're not going to dismiss them, ridicule them, punish them for being a wise guy or whatever. So I think that's your first reaction. And then, give it thoughtful consideration. This is potentially the next great idea, and you don't want to be the one who turned it aside because you turned a blind eye or a deaf ear to one of your sailors or Marines.
I agree with everything the General says. One thing you may want to try, and it's worked for me anyway, you may think this is a crazy idea, but respect for others is really, really important, so you have to show the respect. But you get into a conversation and you start asking questions, and sometimes you can see the bright idea kind of moves to some extent, and it may end up after several conversations that, well, come back around and say, well, Lieutenant, that wasn't such a good idea after all. But you have to be kind of clever and phrase your questions in a respectful way and get a dialogue going. That may help.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'd like to thank all of our audience for your participation and your great questions this morning. I'm sure there are many more in your minds. I think several of our panelists will be available in a moment when we would conclude. I'm going to ask our conference organizer in a moment to give some thanks as well to our panel and some logistics for closing with the panel. I personally would like to thank my panel members here. It's been my honor and a pleasure to be up here with such distinguished individuals. I've been taking some notes as a lifelong student of leadership myself in terms of some practical nuggets. So I hope you've all taken away something today that you can begin to use right away as leaders. And so if you'll please just join me in thanking our panel.